For telling my parents that my jobless brother should move in with them instead of with me? It all began at a Sunday dinner table, when I understood that love can also be delivered as a command. I listened to a decision made without me, spoken with such naturalness, as if my life were a readily available resource. I trusted, I nodded, I smiled, and something inside me broke without a sound. It was not just a betrayal. It was the certainty of having been chosen to bear the burden others refused to carry. While everyone talked about family, I felt myself being pushed out of my own. I tried to stay calm, but calm can also be a dangerous prelude. Every word hid a debt, every silence an intention they never voiced. That day, I stopped being a daughter, I stopped being a support system, and I began to see clearly. Because when you are assigned a sacrifice without being asked, something inside you awakens and never goes back to sleep. I never thought a beautifully set table could feel like a minefield. The white tablecloth, ironed to a crisp, seemed like an innocent surface, but beneath it, something old and sharp pulsed. My mother smiled as if she were about to reveal a pleasant surprise. My father arranged the silverware with a precision that always appeared when he wanted to avoid looking someone in the eye. I knew something was coming. I always did. In my family, important announcements were not prepared with gentle words, but with long silences, exchanged glances, and an uncomfortable expectation that clung to your skin. The first bite never reached my mouth. My mother set her fork down on the plate slowly, as if the sound were part of the message. She said my brother's name with that tone she reserved for lost causes and decisions made without consultation. When she announced that he had lost his job, there was no surprise at the table. My brother lowered his head, rehearsing an expression of defeat I had seen before. What I did not expect was the immediate turn towards me, so direct, so natural, as if the conclusion were obvious. So you will be covering his expenses for a while. She did not ask. She did not specify for how long. She mentioned no figures, no limits. She stated it as if announcing the weather. My father backed the sentence with a short phrase, polished by years of repetition. You support family. I felt something strange. Not anger, not sadness. It was a cold, almost clean clarity. I responded calmly because I knew any other reaction would be used against me. I said perfect and noticed my mother instantly relax, convinced the matter was closed. Then I added the only thing that made sense to me. Then he can move in with you because I am. I did not finish the sentence. My father cleared his throat. My mother frowned. My brother looked up surprised, as if for the first time he had considered that his problem was not mine. The silence stretched again, more tense, more charged. I left the sentence unfinished on purpose. Sometimes what goes unsaid carries the most weight. That lunch was not the beginning of anything. It was the confirmation of everything. I grew up understanding my place without anyone having to explain it. I was the problem solver, the one who never caused trouble, the one who was always fine. My brother was the eternal promise, the misunderstood talent, the one who needed more time, more support, more opportunities. My parents had built a narrative so solid that no one questioned it. Neither did I. In the beginning, while my brother strung together startup ideas that never launched, I learned to support myself. While he received second and third chances, I learned not to ask for them. Every achievement of mine was celebrated with moderation, as if too much pride might throw something off balance. Every stumble of his was a family tragedy that demanded resources, attention, and shared sacrifices, though they always came from the same pocket, mine. That day, hearing my mother's sentence, I remembered moments I thought I had forgotten. The time I paid for his coding boot camp, the month I covered his rent because he was about to close a big deal. The time my parents called to tell me they could not help me with an unexpected car repair bill because they were supporting him. There was always a convincing reason, always a promise that it was the last time. It never was. My calm at the table was not resignation. It was strategy, though I did not fully know it at the time. I observed every gesture. The way my mother avoided mentioning figures, how my father nodded without looking at me, how my brother settled into his chair, already assuming everything was resolved. I realized they did not see a daughter, they saw a resource. I finished the lunch without arguing. We talked about trivial matters. We commented on some irrelevant news. My mother asked about my work with a curiosity that seemed brand new. I answered with short, neutral sentences. No one mentioned the implicit agreement again because for them it was already sealed. When I left, my mother gave me a quick hug and said she was proud of me. That phrase, which once would have comforted me, now sounded hollow. I walked to my car with a strange feeling, as if I had crossed an invisible line. I did not cry. I did not tremble. I thought. Over the next few days, the text messages began to arrive. My brother asking practical questions as if he had already assumed my active role in his life. My parents commenting on expenses, plans, and future needs. Everything was presented as information, not as requests. I responded with measured politeness, without committing to anything concrete. In parallel, I began to look at my own routine with new eyes, my past decisions, the concessions I had made without noticing. I started to see patterns where I had once seen coincidences. I understood it was not just about money, it was about control, expectation, a story that repeated itself because no one ever interrupted it. I had been part of the mechanism until now. One afternoon, while reviewing old bank statements and emails I kept for tax purposes, I found digital records, text messages, and informal agreements, small proofs of commitments made without clarity. Nothing illegal, nothing scandalous, but it was revealing. I realized I had always acted in good faith, while others operated from a place of convenience. I did not feel the urge to confront them. Not yet. Direct confrontation in my family always ended the same way. Strategic tears, speeches about sacrifice, and a carefully distributed guilt that left me carrying the heaviest share. I was not going to repeat that script. I decided to do something different. I started by organizing my boundaries, even if I did not announce them yet. I changed some routines. I delayed responses to texts. I started asking for details where I once accepted vague statements. Each small adjustment generated a subtle reaction. My mother seemed confused. My father uncomfortable. My brother impatient. One night my brother called me. His voice had that tone that mixed urgency with blind confidence. He told me about an opportunity that was about to materialize. He said he needed support for just a few more weeks. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I let a brief silence hang in the air before replying. I told him I needed to see a business plan, a budget, and a clear timeline. It was not a refusal. For him, it was something worse. Condition. He hung up quickly, promising to email everything over. He never did. My parents invited me to dinner a few days later. I accepted, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. I wanted to see how the pieces moved when I did not quite fit. The conversation was cordial but tense. My mother mentioned in passing how difficult everything was. My father talked about unity. I nodded but offered no solutions. At one point, my mother said she did not recognize me anymore. She said it like a soft accusation wrapped in concern. I replied that I recognized myself and that was what mattered. The silence that followed was different from the others. It was not an uncomfortable void. It was an expectant pause. That night, I confirmed something essential. They did not know what to do when I did not play my assigned role. They had no alternative plan. My brother depended on a structure that I supported without anyone admitting it. By gradually withdrawing that support, everything was beginning to creak. I did not act hastily. Haste had always worked against me. I took the time to review my finances, my 401k, my real priorities. I realized I had built a solid life despite the extra burdens. I imagined what it would be like without them. The idea did not scare me, it relieved me. One morning, I received a text from my mother that did not try to hide its urgency. She asked if I could help with a specific, immediate expense for my brother. It was not a small sum. I replied that I needed to discuss it in person. We arranged to meet over the weekend. That meeting was different from the start. There was no white tablecloth or elaborate dishes, just coffee at a neutral cafe and tired glances. My mother began to speak quickly, as if afraid I would interrupt her. My father nodded, but this time his gesture was less certain. When they finished, they looked at me, expecting the answer I had always given. I took a deep breath. I said I could not take on that expense. I explained without raising my voice that it was not sustainable for me, that I needed to prioritize my own financial goals. I did not give long speeches. I did not justify every point. I was clear. The reaction was immediate. My mother looked hurt. My father spoke of disappointment. My brother, who had been quiet, exploded in poorly articulated reproaches. He accused me of abandoning him, of changing, of forgetting where I came from. I listened without responding right away. When he spoke of family, I looked him in the eyes and told him that family was not an excuse for eternal dependence. That was the first visible crack. I left that cafe with my pulse racing but with a firm certainty. There was no going back. I knew the consequences would not take long. My family was not used to losing ground. They would react, try to regain control, and they did. Long text messages arrived, followed by missed calls and distorted versions of what happened shared with other relatives. I maintained a public silence. I answered only what was necessary, always in writing, always with facts. I started documenting everything, not because I planned to use it in a legal sense, but because I wanted to see the full story without emotional filters. In that process, I discovered something I had not expected. A series of my parents' past decisions, agreements made without consulting me, commitments made in my name. Nothing formally illegal, but profoundly unfair. They had counted on me as if I were an automatic extension of their will. My brother was not the only problem. He was the symptom. The betrayal was not a single act. It was cumulative. One afternoon, while reviewing another old email chain, I understood that my role had been defined years ago. Without my consent, I had been chosen as the permanent solution, not just for my financial capacity, but for my character, for my tendency to support, to understand, to not make demands. That revelation did not break me. It organized me. I decided I was not going to disappear or cut everyone off at once. That would have been easy but ineffective. I wanted them to understand without speeches what it meant to lose access to me. I wanted the change to be visible, measurable, impossible to deny. I started with something simple. I canceled a recurring bill payment I had taken on without a formal agreement. I gave advance notice. I offered alternatives that did not involve me. The reaction was immediate. My brother called me furious. My parents tried to mediate. I stood firm, always with the same tone, always with the same arguments. I noticed something interesting. When I did not give in, they started to show their true colors. The careful phrases gave way to more direct reproaches. The smiles faded. The conditional respect was laid bare. Far from hurting me, this gave me an advantage. I began to choose my encounters, to reduce my availability, to respond when it suited me. Not as a punishment but as a reordering. Each new boundary created a small chaos on the other side. I watched, I learned, I adjusted. One night my father called me alone. His voice sounded tired, less firm. He said they were worried, that they did not understand my position, that they feared for my brother's future. I told him that I was worried too, but for different reasons. I said that I had spent years supporting something that was not my responsibility, that I needed him to step into his role as a father, not a spectator. There was a long silence. When he spoke again, his tone was different. It was not understanding. It was calculation. That is when I knew the real conflict was just beginning. Days later, I received an unexpected email, not from my immediate family, but from someone else, someone involved in one of my brother's failed business ventures. The message was brief but suggestive. It mentioned debts, unfulfilled promises, and names I recognized. I read it twice, 3 times. For the first time, I saw an opportunity one had not sought but that presented itself clearly. Not to take impulsive revenge, but to balance a scale that had been tilted for years. I understood that the truth, when managed well, could be more effective than any emotional confrontation. I did not reply immediately. I saved the email, made a few calls, and confirmed some facts. I discovered there were more people tired of the same stories, the same voids, the same excuses. I was not alone. I had never been. I had only been the most silent one. I thought back to the Sunday lunch, to my mother's sentence, to my incomplete reply. I realized that sentence had not finished yet, that what I was about to say could not fit at that table or in that house. It required time, movement, and strategy. The calm before something bigger is not always peaceful. Sometimes it is expansive, electric, charged with possibilities. I was there, at that exact point, with information, with emotional distance, with a clarity I had never had before. The next time we met, nothing would be the same. They did not know it yet. I did. The problem with seeing clearly is that you can no longer pretend you do not understand. From the moment I saved that email and started making calls, something shifted inside me. It was not sudden bravery or a thirst for revenge. It was an uncomfortable certainty. If I did not take control now, others would do it for me as they always had. The answers started to come in layers, not all at once. Each conversation opened another door. Each fact confirmed that my brother had not just failed due to disorganization or bad luck. He had left a constant trail of inflated promises, verbal agreements, and people used as stepping stones. The most disturbing thing was not his behavior, but the silent backing he had received for years. My parents knew not everything but enough. I did not want to believe it at first. I clung to the idea that they had been naive, that they only saw what they wanted to see. That version was more comfortable, but the old text messages, the dates, the amounts, and the excuses repeated with slight variations, left no room for doubt. They had chosen to look the other way because doing so allowed them to keep the family story they so carefully protected intact. I was left out of that protection. One afternoon, I met with one of the people who had worked with my brother. It was not a dramatic or emotional meeting. It was a dry, precise conversation over coffee. He told me about projects that were never delivered, funds that were mismanaged, and meetings canceled at the last minute. He showed me email chains and told me about ignored calls. He was not looking for me to fix anything. He just wanted someone to listen without making excuses for him. When I left, I understood something crucial. I had been the perfect shock absorber. While I covered expenses, calmed tensions, and maintained the image of stability, others were absorbing the impact of his decisions. I made it possible for the system to keep running without facing real consequences. I decided that was over. I made no announcements, called no meetings. I started by adjusting my movements with precision. I reorganized bank accounts, changed passwords, and reviewed old lease agreements where my name appeared more times than I remembered. Each adjustment was small but cumulative. Every step gave me back something I had ceded without realizing it. My parents noticed the change before my brother did. My mother started calling more often with a forced kindness she had never used with me. She would ask how I was, if I needed anything, if I wanted to stop by. I would respond politely, offering nothing more. My father, on the other hand, opted for strategic silence. He knew that talking to me now meant losing ground. My brother was the last to react, and he did it badly. A long text message filled with veiled reproaches arrived one night. He accused me of coldness, of a lack of empathy, of leaving him alone in his worst moment. I read every line without rushing. I recognized phrases I had heard my whole life, almost word for word. It was the same script, only this time I was not in my assigned role. I did not answer that message, nor the next, nor the third. The lack of a response threw him off more than any direct refusal. I knew because he started talking about me to others. Exaggerated versions, convenient omissions. A narrative where I went from being a reliable support to a distant, incomprehensible figure. I knew because these versions filtered back to me through concerned relatives, always with a tone of warning. I did not defend myself. I let them talk. Meanwhile, I continued to gather information, not to expose him publicly, but to understand the real scope of what I had been supporting. I discovered that some commitments I thought were occasional had become fixed expectations from people who assumed I would fill certain gaps because I always had. My name had circulated more than I imagined, associated with a solvency that was not my responsibility to demonstrate. This infuriated me, but not in the loud way I expected. It was a focused, useful anger. One night, while looking through a forgotten folder on my laptop, I found something that changed the pace of everything. An informal memorandum of understanding signed years ago, where my father was listed as a supporter for one of my brother's ventures. It was not legally binding, but it was compromising. In an attached, handwritten note, it mentioned that I would back any financial eventuality. They had never told me. I read that sentence several times, not because I did not understand it, but because I needed to process what it implied. It was not just that they counted on me. They had decided for me without consulting me, without even informing me. That paper had been shown to third parties as a guarantee. My stability had been turned into a bargaining chip. That was the moment I stopped feeling guilty. I requested a meeting with my parents. I did not ask as a daughter, but as an adult demanding clarity. They agreed quickly, perhaps thinking they could steer the situation back on course. We met in a neutral place, a quiet hotel lobby. There was no brewed coffee or familiar objects to soften the atmosphere, only words. I was direct. I showed them a copy of the document. I asked why they had never mentioned it. My mother tried to deflect the conversation by talking about intentions, trust, and difficult times. My father remained silent longer than usual. When he spoke, he denied nothing. He said it had been a necessary decision at the time. Necessary for whom? I asked. I told them that this omission had broken something that could not be fixed with belated explanations, that they had crossed a serious line, and that from now on any mention of my name in others' agreements would have legal consequences. I was not threatening, I was informing. The reaction was mixed. My mother looked hurt as always. My father for the first time seemed unsure. He asked me what I wanted. I replied that I wanted transparency and distance, that I would no longer support a structure that left me exposed. I left that meeting without hugs or long goodbyes. I felt a mix of relief and vertigo. I had said what I had never said, and I knew it would not go unanswered. That same week, something unexpected happened. I received a formal demand letter related to one of my brother's failed projects. My name was not listed as a defendant, but the indirect mention was clear. Someone was trying to activate past responsibilities. I did not panic. On the contrary, it was confirmation that I had done the right thing by getting ahead of it. I consulted a lawyer. I showed him everything I had gathered. He told me something that surprised me with its simplicity. I had no legal obligation to cover anything. The references to me were informal with no binding power, but they did carry narrative weight. They had been used to build trust that was now crumbling. That night I received a call from my brother. His tone was different, less aggressive, more urgent. He told me about problems he had not mentioned before, external pressures, people who were starting to demand answers. He asked me to speak to someone on his behalf, to clear up misunderstandings. I said no. I did not raise my voice, did not over-explain, just said I would not intervene. There was a long silence. When he spoke again, his voice had something new in it, fear. I hung up with a strange feeling. Not satisfaction, not sadness, but a tense calm, as if I had crossed another point of no return. My parents reacted quickly. Conciliatory messages, invitations to talk, vague promises of change. I replied politely but did not budge. I had learned that words without structure meant nothing. Meanwhile, other people started contacting me, not to ask for help but to warn me, to tell me my name had been mentioned in contexts that did not benefit me. Every message reinforced the same idea. I had been an involuntary shield for far too long. I decided to do something I had never done. Tell my side of the story, but only to those who mattered. Not on social media, not in broad conversations, but directly with facts. I was not seeking sympathy. I was seeking precision. The reaction was immediate. Some people were surprised, others not so much. Several told me they had always suspected something, that now everything made sense. That validation did not inflate my ego. Gave me backing. My brother cornered tried one last move. He sent me a document detailing a supposed restructuring plan. Dates, figures, commitments. All very well presented. Too late. I replied that any agreement had to be handled with third parties without my intervention, that I would not sign or endorse anything. That response marked a before and after. The following days were chaotic for them. I knew from crossed messages, desperate calls, and abrupt silences. I stayed firm, focused on my work, on my decisions. It was not indifference, it was prioritization. One afternoon, I received a message from my mother that disarmed me with its unexpectedness. It was not a plea or a reproach, it was a partial confession. She admitted they had relied too much on me always being there, that they had not foreseen this scenario, and that now they did not know how to support my brother. I replied with a short sentence. I told her that learning to support him without me was part of the process they had avoided for years. There was no immediate reply. That night I slept soundly for the first time in a long time, not because everything was resolved, but because I was no longer carrying what was not mine to carry. But the calm was short-lived. The next day I received a call I was not expecting. It was from a key investor on one of the old projects, someone who had kept their distance until now. They asked for a meeting. They said there were things I needed to know, that my name appeared in emails discussing key decisions that were never formalized. I agreed. We met 2 days later. It was a long, direct conversation with no beating around the bush. He showed me emails where my parents had intervened on my brother's behalf, using my stability as an argument, not to legally bind me, but to reassure others. It was a wider network than I had imagined. When I left that meeting, I understood the story was not just familial, it was structural. They had built a system where I was the balancing point without giving me a voice or a vote. And now, by removing myself, the whole thing was collapsing. I did not feel guilt. I felt responsibility, but for myself. That same night, I made a decision that would change the course of everything. I was done reacting. I was going to move a key piece. I drafted an email, not long, not emotional, addressed to all relevant parties. In it, I clarified my position, denied any implicit endorsement, and requested that any future mention of my name be immediately removed from their communications. I was not threatening. I was establishing facts. Before sending it, I hesitated for a few seconds. I knew this message was a point of no return, that once it was sent, the consequences would accelerate, that my family would interpret it as a final betrayal. I sent it. Minutes later, the replies began. Some of surprise, others of relief, several of confirmation. The effect was immediate. What had been rumor became certainty. What had been assumption became fact. My phone did not stop ringing that night. Calls from my parents, my brother, numbers I did not have saved. I did not answer. It was not the time. I sat down and reviewed each response, each reaction. Everything pointed to the same thing. The system was reconfiguring itself without me as its central support. Before going to sleep, I received one last text. It was from my father. Just 4 words. We need to talk. I knew the next meeting would not be a negotiation or an attempt at superficial reconciliation. It would be a real confrontation. One where they could no longer feign ignorance or good intentions. I turned off my phone with a new clarity. The board had changed, the pieces were in motion, and for the first time I was not reacting to others' decisions. I was setting the pace. The true cost of years of silence was about to come to light. When I turned off my phone after my father's message, I did not feel anxiety. I felt something more final, like when a door closes on its own and you know no one is going to open it again. For years I had feared this moment, imagining it full of reproaches, tears, and raised voices. The reality was drier. There was nothing left to negotiate. All that remained was to sort out the mess others had made using my name. I slept little, but not from nerves. My mind worked with an almost surgical clarity. I went over conversations, dates, and decisions, not to mentally punish them, but to arrive at the meeting without any cracks in my resolve. I knew they would try to confuse, to mix emotions with arguments, to present themselves as victims of circumstance. I was not going to allow it. We met the next day. I did not choose the place, they did as always. Their living room. A space loaded with memories that once would have disarmed me. This time it did not work. I sat across from them without rushing, without smiling, without any visible tension. My father spoke first. He said that everything had gotten out of control, that they never imagined things would go this far. My mother nodded, her eyes moist, ready to intervene if necessary. I did not interrupt them. When they finished, I let the silence do its work. Then I spoke. I did not raise my voice. I did not use grand words. I listed facts, dates, decisions made without my knowledge, people who were promised non-existent backing. I explained how each of those acts had built a structure that was now collapsing. I did not accuse them, I described. My father tried to justify himself. He said he had acted as a father, that his priority had always been to protect the family. I replied that protecting is not the same as enabling, that misunderstood protection had turned a manageable problem into a chain of damage. My mother wanted to talk about love, about sacrifice. I told her that sacrifice cannot be one-sided or eternal. Then came the moment they had been avoiding. My brother joined the conversation. Until that moment, he had remained on the sidelines as if his presence was not central. He sat down rigidly, with a mix of wounded pride and poorly disguised desperation. He looked at me as if searching for the person who had always given in. He did not find her. He started talking quickly. He said he never asked for so much, that things had been exaggerated, that he had suffered too. He told me about pressure, others' expectations, bad luck. I listened attentively. When he finished, I asked him something simple. In all those years, when did you ever face a real consequence? He could not answer. That silence was more revealing than any confession. I let it linger. Then I told him that I would no longer be his safety net, that I would not cover his mistakes or soften the blows, that if he wanted to rebuild something, he would have to do it without my implicit backing. The reaction was immediate. He switched from attempting dialogue to reproach. He accused me of abandonment, of coldness, of betraying those who had raised me. I did not engage on that level. I told him that confusing support with dependence had been the original mistake, that I was not responsible for his inability to stand on his own. My parents tried to intervene. I asked them not to. For the first time, they needed to listen without correcting. I took out the documents I had prepared. They were not threats. They were formal clarifications. I explained that I had sent notifications to disassociate myself from any unauthorized commitments, that my name could no longer be used as a guarantee, and that any future attempt would be met with a legal response. I did not say that last word harshly. I said it like someone describing an inevitable option. My father looked down. My mother brought a hand to her chest. My brother froze. That was the definitive breaking point. There were no shouts, no uncontrollable crying, just a belated understanding that the ground had shifted forever. I stood up. I made it clear there would be no more meetings of this kind, and I left. I did not look back. The consequences came quickly. In the following days, my brother's pending projects began to fall apart, one by one. Not because I intervened, but because there was no longer a shadow to reassure everyone else. People demanded clear answers. Informal agreements became useless. The lack of structure was exposed. My parents tried to do damage control. They called people, offered apologies, and looked for improvised solutions, but without my backing, their leverage was limited. For the first time, they had to face the result of years of convenient decisions. I moved on with my life, not as an escape but as real progress. I focused on my work, on projects I had postponed, on relationships that did not require me to shrink myself. I felt an unfamiliar lightness. Not euphoria but balance. One day, I received an email from one of the people affected by the failed projects. He thanked me for the clarity. He said my stance had allowed them to close chapters that had been open for too long. That message confirmed something essential. The truth, when presented unadorned, can be liberating even for those who do not expect it. My brother tried to contact me several times, at first with reproaches, then with pleas, and finally with silence. I did not respond, not as punishment, but because there was nothing left to say. Any conversation at that point would have only served to repeat old patterns. My parents took longer to accept the new reality. My mother went through predictable stages: denial, sadness, attempts at reconciliation. My father became distant, as if the weight of what had happened had eroded his confidence. I did not reject them, but I did not step back either. Over time, something unexpected happened. My father asked to talk, just the two of us. I agreed without expectations. We met in a quiet park. There were no reproaches. He told me he had understood late, but he understood clearly. He admitted he had delegated responsibilities to me that should never have been mine, that he had mistaken my strength for infinite availability. He did not offer a theatrical apology. He offered something more difficult: acknowledgement. I told him I accepted his words, but that it did not mean going back. Our relationship would have to be redefined from a different place. He nodded. For the first time, he did not try to correct me. My mother took longer, but she got there. One day she told me she had lived for years in fear of my brother failing, and that fear had led her to justify the unjustifiable. I replied that fear does not excuse harm, but acknowledging it was a start. There were no long hugs. There was respect. My brother was left alone with his decisions. Not abandoned, but finally responsible. His process was not linear. There were setbacks, attempts to revert to old shortcuts, and frustration. But he no longer had anyone to lean on without effort. That absence was his only real chance for change. I did not know right away if he took it, and for the first time I did not feel the need to know. Months passed. The distance became normal. My life reordered itself quietly. I discovered that peace does not always arrive with celebrations, but with a routine that no longer feels heavy. I began to enjoy small decisions, silence without tension, and plans that did not depend on someone else's crisis. One day, without warning, I received an email from my brother. It was not long. It asked for nothing. It acknowledged his mistakes without embellishment. It said he was starting from scratch without grand promises. He did not ask for a reply, just put it on the record. I read it once. I did not respond immediately, not because I hesitated, but because I no longer felt a sense of urgency. Days later, I sent him a short line. I wished him clarity and persistence. Nothing more. That was the last piece that fell into place. Looking back, I understood that my greatest act of justice had not been to expose or confront, but to withdraw with precision. Ceasing to be the invisible support allowed the truth to emerge without any need for scandal. Everyone was left to face their own reflection. I did not win anything tangible. I did not recover money or status. I regained something more valuable, authority over my own life. The family, as I had known it, was never the same again. Neither was I. And that was not a loss. It was an inevitable evolution. Sometimes silence is not emptiness. It is the sound of one structure falling so that a more honest one can be built. I was that silence, and for the first time it belonged to me. Comment. After hearing a story like this, I often find myself thinking about the quiet strength it takes to choose a different path. Setting a boundary is not an act of aggression. It is a profound act of self-respect. True kindness must always include being kind to yourself first. We are responsible for the energy we protect and the peace we cultivate in our own lives. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for everyone is to step back and allow them to face their own responsibilities. Healing often begins the moment we decide to stop carrying burdens that were never ours to hold. You do not have to win every argument to find your peace. You simply have to choose your well-being over chaos. I hope this story reminds you of the immense power you have over your own story and your own peace. Take good care of yourself. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.